Papa, why don't you ever come home to us?" The small voice cut through the elegant chatter of 200 of Austin's most powerful people like a knife through silk. James Morrison, billionaire CEO of Morrison Industries, froze mid-sentence during his annual company gala speech, his champagne glass trembling in his hand as he stared down at a 5-year-old girl with eyes that were unmistakably his own. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I think you have me confused with someone else," James whispered, his voice barely audible over the sudden silence that had fallen over the ballroom. The little girl tilted her head, studying his face with the innocent certainty that only children possess. "No, Papa. Mama showed me your picture every night before bed. She said you were busy making beautiful buildings for people, but that you loved us very much." Across the room, a cleaning cart clattered to the marble floor as Isabella Rodriguez watched her carefully constructed world crumble in real time. The secret she had guarded for 6 years, the truth she had sworn to take to her grave, was spilling from her daughter's lips in front of the most elite social circle in Texas. "Sofia, Mija, come here right now," Isabella called desperately, pushing through the crowd of stunned faces in designer gowns and $1,000 suits. But Sofia stood her ground, her small hand reaching up to touch James's perfectly pressed sleeve. "Papa, Mama cries sometimes when she looks at your picture. Are you sad too?" Hello, family. I want to dive straight into this story. If you're new here, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single moment. And now, let's begin. James Morrison was the kind of man who measured his worth in quarterly reports and stock prices. At 34, he commanded a business empire worth over $2 billion, built from the ashes of a childhood that would have broken most people. He lived in a glass penthouse that scraped the Austin skyline, worked 18-hour days without complaint, and had earned a reputation as the most ruthless negotiator in Texas real estate. But success had come at a price. James had no close friends, no meaningful relationships, and certainly no family. He preferred it that way. Family meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant weakness, and weakness meant failure. These were the equations that had guided his life since he was 12 years old, and learned that the only person he could truly depend on was himself. The Morrison Industries headquarters occupied 40 floors of gleaming steel and glass in downtown Austin. From his corner office on the top floor, James could see the entire city spread out below him like a chessboard, each building in development a piece in the game he had mastered. The view reminded him daily of how far he had come from the foster homes and group homes of his youth. James's typical day began at 5 in the morning with a workout in his private gym, followed by coffee and financial reports while most of the city still slept. By 7, he was in his office, reviewing contracts and making decisions that affected thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. He thrived on the pressure, the constant demand for excellence, the weight of responsibility that would crush most people. What James didn't know, what he had never bothered to notice, was that every night after the executive floors emptied and the lights dimmed, a different world came alive in his building. The night cleaning crew arrived like shadows, moving through the spaces where power and money lived during the day, making everything pristine for the next day's battles. And among those shadows was Isabella Rodriguez, a woman whose life had intersected with his in ways he couldn't imagine. Isabella was 28 years old, though the responsibilities she carried made her seem older. She had immigrated to the United States from Guadalajara when she was 18, carrying nothing but hope and the kind of determination that comes from having no other choice. For the past 6 years, she had worked the night cleaning shift at Morrison Industries, invisible to the executives who ruled the daylight hours. Most people who knew Isabella would describe her as quietly beautiful, with dark hair she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail and brown eyes that missed nothing. She moved through the world with the careful grace of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible, to be essential but unnoticed. But those who looked closer would see the intelligence that sparked in her eyes when she thought no one was watching, the gentle humor she shared with her co-workers during their brief breaks, and the fierce protectiveness that transformed her completely when it came to her daughter. Sofia Rodriguez was 5 years old and possessed the kind of fearless curiosity that made her mother's heart race with both pride and terror. She had inherited her mother's dark hair and quick mind, but her eyes were different. They were hazel, flecked with gold, and they saw the world with an intensity that made adults uncomfortable. Sofia asked questions that had no easy answers and made observations that cut straight to the heart of things grown-ups preferred to leave unexamined. Isabella worked 3 jobs to support herself and Sofia. In addition to her night cleaning position at Morrison Industries, she cleaned houses on weekends and worked at a small cafe during the early morning hours before Sofia woke up. It was an exhausting schedule that left her running on coffee and determination, but it was also a source of pride. Every dollar she earned was a step toward the small business she dreamed of opening, a catering company that would allow her to use the culinary skills her grandmother had taught her. The Morrison Industries building became familiar territory for Isabella over the years. She knew which executives stayed late, which offices required special attention, and exactly how long each floor took to clean thoroughly. She had developed an efficient system that allowed her to finish her work and still get home in time to catch a few hours of sleep before Sophia woke up for school. What Isabella had never shared with her coworkers, what she had never told another living soul, was that her work at Morrison Industries was more than just a job. It was a daily reminder of a single night 6 years ago that had changed the trajectory of her entire life. The executive floors of Morrison Industries were a world unto themselves. The 40th floor, where James's office commanded its view of the city, was decorated with expensive art and furnished with pieces that cost more than most people's cars. The conference rooms were equipped with technology that could connect to anywhere in the world, and the private dining room could seat 20 people for meals prepared by a chef who had trained in Paris. It was in this rarefied atmosphere that James felt most at home. The clean lines, the subtle displays of wealth, the constant hum of productivity. Everything was designed to project power and success, from the marble floors that reflected the recessed lighting to the floor-to-ceiling windows that made visitors feel as though they were suspended in the sky. James's private office was the crown jewel of the space. A massive desk made from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood dominated the room, while 2 walls of windows provided panoramic views of Austin. The third wall was lined with awards, photographs of groundbreaking ceremonies, and framed newspaper articles chronicling his business victories. The fourth wall held a single piece of art, an abstract painting in blues and grays that was the only hint of anything personal in the entire space. Most people who entered James's office for the first time were intimidated by its scale and luxury. Business rivals found themselves unconsciously lowering their voices. Employees delivered reports with extra precision. Board members chose their words more carefully. The room was designed to remind everyone who entered exactly who held the power. But James had long since stopped noticing the effect his office had on others. For him, it was simply the place where he worked, the command center from which he built his empire. He spent so many hours there that he had installed a small apartment behind a concealed door, complete with a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchenette. Many nights, he never left the building at all. The irony was not lost on Isabella that she knew James's office more intimately than most of his own employees. She cleaned every surface, organized every paper that he left scattered across his desk, and emptied the trash that contained the remnants of his daily life. She had seen the takeout containers that revealed he rarely ate real meals, the empty coffee cups that showed he worked far too late, and the pill bottles that suggested the stress was taking its toll on his health. Sometimes Isabella found herself pausing as she worked, looking at the photographs on his walls and wondering about the man who had built all of this. In the business articles, he was described as brilliant but cold, successful but solitary. The photographs from various events showed him always alone or surrounded by business associates rather than friends. There was something lonely about the pictures that made Isabella's heart ache, even though she knew she had no right to feel anything for a man who didn't even know she existed. Sophia often asked about her work, curious about the tall building where her mama spent her nights. Isabella had shown her pictures of the city skyline, pointing out the Morrison Industries tower and explaining that Mama helped keep it clean and beautiful for all the important people who worked there during the day. "What kind of important people, Mama?" Sophia would ask, her eyes wide with imagination. "People who build things," Isabella would explain. "People who make decisions that help the city grow and provide jobs for families like ours. Are they nice people?" Isabella always paused at this question, thinking of the executives she occasionally glimpsed during her late-night shifts. Most of them seemed focused and serious, rushing through the halls with their phones pressed to their ears or their faces buried in documents. They rarely acknowledged the cleaning staff, not out of malice, but simply because they inhabited different worlds. "They work very hard," Isabella would finally answer, which was true enough without being judgmental. But Sophia's questions about her father had become more persistent lately. "Why don't I have a papa like the other kids at school?" she would ask with the directness that only children possessed. Isabella had prepared for this question, but it never got easier to answer. "Some families are different, Mia. Some children have a mama and a papa, some have just a mama or just a papa, and some have grandparents or aunts and uncles. What matters is that you are loved very much. But do I have a papa somewhere?" "Yes, sweetheart, you do. Does he know about me?" This was where Isabella's carefully prepared answers always fell apart. How could she explain to a 5-year-old the complex circumstances that had led to her existence. How could she make Sophia understand that sometimes adults made choices that seemed right at the time, but created consequences that lasted forever? "That's complicated, baby girl," Isabella would say, pulling Sophia close. "But what's not complicated is how much I love you, and how grateful I am every day that you're mine." Sophia would usually accept this answer for a while, but Isabella could see her daughter's mind working, processing the information and preparing more questions for later. She was a smart child, too smart sometimes, and Isabella knew that eventually she would need better answers. The truth was that Isabella thought about Sophia's father every day. She thought about him when she cleaned his office, when she organized his papers, when she emptied the trash can beside his desk. She thought about the night they had met, about the connection they had shared, about the choice she had made to disappear from his life before he even knew she had been part of it. James Morrison had no idea that the woman who kept his office spotless every night was the same woman who had shared his bed for one incredible evening 6 years ago. He had no idea that the child she went home to every morning had his eyes and his stubborn chin and his quick mind. He lived his life in compartments, focused entirely on the business of building his empire, while the most important thing he had ever created remained completely invisible to him. The annual Morrison Industries Gala was the social event of Austin's fall season. Held in the building's spectacular 42nd floor event space, it drew everyone who mattered in Texas business, politics, and society. The guest list read like a who's who of the state's power brokers, and invitations were coveted by those who wanted to be seen as part of the inner circle. For James, the gala served multiple purposes. It was a chance to strengthen business relationships, showcase Morrison Industries' success, and remind everyone in attendance of his position at the top of Austin's hierarchy. He spent weeks preparing for the event, reviewing the guest list, planning his remarks, and ensuring that every detail would reflect the company's excellence. The theme of this year's gala was Building Tomorrow, and the event space had been transformed into a showcase of architectural innovation. Models of Morrison Industries' current projects were displayed throughout the room, while screens showed time-lapse videos of buildings rising from empty lots. The effect was meant to inspire and impress, demonstrating the company's vision for Austin's future. James had chosen to focus his speech on family values in business, a somewhat ironic choice given his personal life. The talking points had been crafted by his public relations team to appeal to the family-focused voters and consumers who increasingly influenced business success. He would speak about creating jobs that supported families, developing communities where children could thrive, and building a legacy that would benefit future generations. Isabella had been assigned to work the gala along with the rest of the evening cleaning crew. The plan was for them to set up the event space earlier in the day, then work discreetly in the background during the event itself, ensuring that everything remained perfect as the evening progressed. It was considered a prestigious assignment among the cleaning staff, a chance to see how the other half lived. Isabella had arranged for her usual babysitter to watch Sophia during the gala, but at the last minute, the teenage girl had gotten sick. With no other options and no way to miss work, Isabella had made the difficult decision to bring Sophia with her. She planned to set up a small area in the service corridor where Sophia could sleep or play quietly while Isabella worked. "Remember, Mija," Isabella had told Sophia as they entered the building through the service entrance. "This is Mama's workplace, and tonight there are very important people here for a big party. You need to stay in our special room and be very quiet, okay?" Sophia had nodded solemnly, clutching her small backpack filled with coloring books and toys. She was excited about seeing the building where her mama worked, though she promised to be good and stay hidden. Isabella had created a comfortable space for Sophia in a storage room near the service elevator, complete with pillows, blankets, and snacks. She checked on her daughter regularly throughout the evening, finding her alternately napping and working on elaborate crayon masterpieces. The gala was proceeding flawlessly. The guests were clearly impressed by the displays and the sophisticated atmosphere. Business cards were being exchanged, deals were being discussed in hushed tones, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves appropriately. James moved through the crowd with practiced ease, making conversation with key clients and ensuring that important guests felt properly attended to. As the evening reached its crescendo, James took the stage to deliver his keynote address. The room gradually quieted as conversations paused and attention focused on the tall figure commanding the microphone. He looked out over the sea of faces, recognizing most of them, feeling the satisfaction that came from bringing together so many influential people in celebration of his company's success. "Ladies and gentlemen," James began, his voice carrying easily across the room, "thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate not just Morrison Industries' accomplishments, but our shared vision for Austin's future. The speech was going exactly as planned. James spoke about innovation and growth, about the importance of strong partnerships, about the responsibility that successful businesses had to their communities. He was building toward his conclusion about family values when he noticed a small commotion near the service entrance. Isabella had discovered that Sophia was no longer in the storage room. The little girl had apparently grown curious about the sounds of music and laughter coming from the main event space. Despite all of Isabella's warnings and preparations, Sophia had slipped away to investigate the party she could hear but couldn't see. Building strong families is at the heart of everything we do at Morrison Industries, James continued from the stage, unaware that his world was about to change forever. When we create jobs, we're not just providing income, we're providing the foundation that allows families to thrive, children to dream, and communities to flourish. Sophia had made her way through the service corridors with the determination that only curious children possess. She followed the sounds of music and voices until she found herself at the edge of the magnificent ballroom, her eyes wide with wonder at the beautiful people in their beautiful clothes gathered in the beautiful room. But Sophia wasn't looking at the decorations or the elegant guests. Her attention was focused entirely on the man standing on the stage, speaking in a strong, clear voice that carried across the room. Even from a distance, even in the midst of so many strangers, Sophia recognized him immediately. The measure of our success, James continued, isn't just in the buildings we construct or the profits we generate. It's in the legacy we leave for the next generation, in the world we're building for our children. That's when Sophia stepped into the ballroom proper, walking with the fearless confidence of a child who had never learned to doubt her place in the world. The adults around her were too polite to stop a small child, assuming she belonged to one of the guests. Sophia walked straight through the crowd toward the stage, drawn by the magnetic pull of recognition. James was concluding his speech when he noticed heads turning, whispers starting, attention shifting away from the stage toward something happening in the crowd. He paused, following the guests' gazes until he saw her. A small girl with dark hair and serious eyes, walking toward him with unmistakable purpose. In closing, James said, his voice beginning to waver as the child drew closer, I want to remind everyone that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about the connections we choose to honor, the responsibilities we choose to embrace, and the love we choose to share. Sophia had reached the front of the crowd now, looking up at James with eyes that were disturbingly familiar. The room had grown quiet, sensing that something unexpected was happening but not yet understanding what it meant. Papa, Sophia said, her clear voice carrying in the suddenly silent room. Why don't you ever come home to us? The champagne glass slipped from James's hand, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. 200 of Austin's most powerful people stood frozen, watching a scene that none of them could have predicted. Can you imagine the embarrassment, the shock, the complete upheaval of everything both of these people thought they knew? Comment below if you think James should have recognized Sophia immediately. James stared down at the little girl, his mind racing to process what was happening. The child was beautiful, with delicate features and an undeniable resemblance to someone he couldn't quite place. But more disturbing than her appearance were her eyes, which looked at him with a familiarity that made his chest tight with inexplicable emotion. I'm sorry, sweetheart, James managed to say, his voice barely audible over the stunned silence of the room. But I think you have me confused with someone else. Sophia tilted her head, studying his face with the patient certainty of a child who knew something that adults didn't understand. No, Papa. Mama showed me your picture every night before bed. She said you were busy making beautiful buildings for people, but that you loved us very much. The words hit James like a physical blow. Somewhere in the crowd, he heard a woman's sharp intake of breath, followed by the crash of something metal hitting the floor. He looked up to see Isabella Rodriguez standing near the service entrance, her face drained of all color, her hands shaking as she stared at the scene unfolding before her. Recognition slammed into James with the force of a freight train. 6 years collapsed into a single moment as he remembered everything. The late night in his office, the woman who had cleaned around him as he worked, the conversation that had lasted until dawn, the connection that had felt more real than anything in his carefully constructed life, the morning when he had woken up alone, wondering if he had dreamed the entire encounter. Sophia, Mija, come here right now, Isabella called desperately, pushing through the crowd of stunned faces. But her daughter stood her ground, her small hand reaching up to touch James's sleeve. Papa, Mama cries sometimes when she looks at your picture. Are you sad too? The question hung in the air like a challenge, demanding an answer that James wasn't prepared to give. He looked from Sophia's trusting face to Isabella's terrified expression, understanding beginning to dawn with horrible clarity. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity. This wasn't a confused child or an elaborate prank. This was his daughter, standing in front of 200 witnesses, asking him why he had never come home. The silence in the room was deafening. James could feel the weight of every stare, could sense the whispered conversations that would start the moment he left the stage. His carefully managed public image, his reputation for control and competence, everything he had built was crumbling around him because of 6 simple words from a 5-year-old child. "Ladies and gentlemen," James said finally, his voice hoarse with shock, "I think we'll conclude this evening's program here. Thank you all for coming." But nobody moved. The crowd remained frozen, transfixed by the drama playing out before them. Margaret Ashworth, the society columnist for Austin's largest newspaper, was already taking notes on her phone. Richard Lawson, James's biggest business rival, was watching with undisguised interest. Everyone who mattered in Austin was witnessing the moment when James Morrison's private life exploded into public view. Sophia seemed oblivious to the chaos she had created. She was focused entirely on James, waiting for an answer to her question with the patience that only children possess. Her small hand was still touching his sleeve, a connection that felt both foreign and familiar. "Why don't you answer her?" The voice came from somewhere in the crowd, though James couldn't identify the speaker. "The child asked you a question." Isabella reached them then, her face flushed with embarrassment and fear. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Morrison," she said, her accent more pronounced under stress. "Sophia, come with Mama right now. You're not supposed to be here." "But Mama," Sophia protested, looking confused by the adult's strange behavior. "You said Papa works here. You said he builds beautiful things. This is him, isn't it?" Isabella's eyes met James's across the top of Sophia's head, and in that moment, years of carefully buried truth passed between them. He saw her fear, her regret, her desperate love for their daughter. She saw his shock, his confusion, and the beginning of an anger that would only grow as he processed what had happened. "Yes, mija," Isabella whispered, her voice breaking. "This is your papa." The admission rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Phones appeared as guests began recording and photographing the scene. James felt the walls of his private world crumbling, everything he had worked to keep separate now thrust into the spotlight of public scrutiny. Security guards were approaching now, unsure whether to intervene or wait for direction from their boss. The catering staff had stopped serving, standing frozen with trays in their hands as they watched the drama unfold. Even the musicians had stopped playing, leaving the room eerily quiet except for the whispered conversations growing louder by the moment. James looked down at Sophia one more time, taking in every detail of her face. The resemblance was undeniable now that he knew to look for it. She had his eyes, his stubborn chin, even the way he had tilted his head as a child when he was thinking hard about something. How had he never noticed? How had she been invisible to him for so long? "We need to talk," he said quietly to Isabella, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. Isabella nodded, scooping Sophia up in her arms despite the child's protests. "Not here," she whispered. "Not like this." But James was already moving, walking off the stage with the decisive stride that had built his empire. The crowd parted before him, everyone eager to get out of the way of whatever storm was coming. Isabella followed, carrying Sophia, who was looking over her shoulder at the beautiful room full of beautiful people who were all staring at them with expressions she couldn't understand. As they disappeared through the service entrance, the ballroom erupted into conversation. Phones buzzed with text messages. Social media posts began appearing within minutes. The story of Austin's most eligible bachelor and his secret daughter would be trending on local news sites before the valet service finished bringing cars around. But in that moment, James Morrison wasn't thinking about damage control or public relations or stock prices. He was thinking about a little girl who called him Papa and a woman who had kept the most important secret of his life for 6 years. He was thinking about a night that had felt like a dream and a reality that was more complicated than any business deal he had ever negotiated. The revelation that would define the rest of his life had arrived in the form of a 5-year-old with his eyes and her mother's courage, asking the one question he had never prepared himself to answer. "Why don't you ever come home to us?" The service elevator climbed silently to the 40th floor, carrying 3 people whose lives had just been irrevocably changed. Sophia sat quietly in her mother's arms, sensing the tension, even if she didn't understand its source. Isabella stared at the elevator's digital display, watching the numbers climb while her heart hammered against her ribs. James stood with his back to them, his shoulders rigid with barely controlled emotion. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the executive floor in all its polished glory. James walked out without looking back, his footsteps echoing off the marble floors as he headed toward his office. Isabella hesitated for a moment, then followed, carrying Sophia down the hallway she had cleaned countless times but never walked during business hours. James's office looked different in the evening light. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering expanse of Austin spread out below, while the recessed lighting cast everything in warm, golden tones. Sophia's eyes widened as she took in the enormous space, the beautiful furniture, the wall of windows that made her feel like she was flying above the city. "Close the door," James said without turning around. He was standing at the windows, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the skyline he had helped shape. Isabella did as he asked, then set Sophia down gently. Her daughter immediately gravitated toward the windows, pressing her small hands against the glass as she marveled at the view. "Look, Mama," Sophia whispered in wonder. "We're so high up. I can see the whole world from here." "Not the whole world, Mija," Isabella replied softly. "Just our city." James finally turned around, his face a carefully controlled mask that Isabella recognized from the business articles she had read about him over the years. It was the expression he wore when negotiating difficult deals or facing hostile shareholders. But Isabella could see the storm raging beneath the surface, the questions and accusations building pressure like steam in a kettle. 6 years, James said, his voice dangerously quiet. 6 years you've been working in this building. 6 years you've been cleaning my office. 6 years you've known, and you never said a word. Isabella lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "What was I supposed to say, James?" "Excuse me, Mr. Morrison, but you got me pregnant during our one-night stand and I decided to raise your daughter alone because I knew you'd never believe she was yours. You could have tried." "I did try," Isabella shot back, her own anger finally surfacing. "I called your office 17 times in the first month after Sophia was born. I left messages with your assistant. I even wrote you a letter explaining everything. But you never called back, you never responded. You made it very clear that I didn't exist in your world." James frowned, genuine confusion replacing some of his anger. "I never got any messages. I never saw any letter." "Of course you didn't," Isabella said bitterly. "Because cleaning ladies don't get access to billionaire CEOs. Your assistant probably threw my messages away without a second thought. Your security probably screened out my letter as some kind of scam. I was nobody to you, James." "Less than nobody." The truth of her words hit James like a physical blow. He knew how his office operated, how fiercely his staff protected his time and privacy. Anyone without the right connections or credentials would be filtered out automatically. Isabella was right. Even if she had tried to contact him, the message would never have reached him. Sophia had grown bored with the view and was now exploring the office, running her small hands along the smooth surface of James's desk. She picked up a paperweight, a chunk of crystal that caught the light and threw rainbows across the wall. "It's pretty," she said, holding it up for both adults to see. "Like Mama's special glass that makes colors dance." Isabella quickly moved to take the paperweight from Sophia's hands. "Don't touch Papa's things, Mija. They're very expensive." "It's fine," James said quietly, watching Sophia's disappointed expression. "She can look at whatever she wants." He walked over to his desk and opened one of the drawers, pulling out a smaller crystal ornament that caught the light just as beautifully as the paperweight. "This one is easier to hold," he said, offering it to Sophia. Sophia took the crystal carefully, turning it in her hands and watching the lights dance across the ceiling. "Thank you, Papa," she said with simple sincerity. The word hit James every time she said it, a combination of joy and pain that he wasn't prepared for. This beautiful, innocent child was calling him Papa, looking at him with complete trust and acceptance, as if his absence from her life was a simple misunderstanding that could be easily corrected. "Sophia," Isabella said gently, "why don't you sit in that big chair and play with the pretty crystal while Mama and Papa talk about grown-up things?" Sophia nodded and climbed into one of the leather chairs facing James's desk, her legs swinging as she continued to examine her new treasure. Isabella waited until her daughter was distracted, then turned back to James with fire in her eyes. "You want to know why I never told you," she said, her voice low but fierce. "You want to know why I kept this secret for 6 years? Because I knew exactly what would happen. You would have demanded a DNA test to make sure she was really yours. You would have had. Your lawyers draw up some kind of custody agreement that protected your reputation and your money. You would have treated Sophia like a business arrangement instead of a human being. You don't know that," James protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't I?" Isabella challenged. "Tell me honestly, James, if I had walked into your office 6 years ago and told you I was pregnant with your child, what would you have done? Would you have welcomed me with open arms? Would you have been ready to be a father? Or would you have assumed I was trying to trap you for your money? James opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. The honest answer was that he would have assumed the worst. 6 years ago, he had been even more cynical about relationships, even more convinced that everyone who approached him had ulterior motives. He probably would have demanded a DNA test. He definitely would have had his lawyers involved. He might have even assumed it was some kind of elaborate con. You're right, he admitted reluctantly. 6 years ago, I wouldn't have handled it well. And what about now? Isabella asked. What are you going to do now that you know the truth? It was a fair question, and James realized he didn't have a good answer. Everything had happened so fast, the revelation so sudden and public, that he hadn't had time to process what it meant or what he wanted to do about it. Before he could respond, Sophia spoke up from her chair. Mama, why are you and Papa talking in your angry voices? Both adults looked at their daughter, reminded that their argument was taking place in front of the most important person in the room. Isabella immediately softened her tone. We're not angry, Mia. We're just trying to figure some things out. Are you figuring out why Papa never came to see us? Sophia asked with the directness that only children possessed. The question hung in the air between them, impossible to answer without explaining concepts that were far too complex for a 5-year-old to understand. James looked at Sophia's trusting face and felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he had built years ago beginning to crumble. Yes, he said finally. We're trying to figure that out. Sophia nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her. Mama said you were very busy building important things, but I thought maybe you forgot about us. I didn't forget about you, James said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I didn't know about you. But I didn't forget. It was a distinction that probably didn't make much difference to a 5-year-old, but it felt important to James to make the clarification. He hadn't abandoned his daughter deliberately. He had simply been ignorant of her existence, which was both better and worse in ways he was still trying to understand. Isabella was watching this exchange with a mixture of hope and wariness. She could see that James was genuinely affected by Sophia, that his surprise and confusion were real rather than calculated. But she had spent 6 years protecting her daughter from disappointment, and she wasn't ready to lower her guard just because James seemed sincere. Sophia, she said gently, it's getting very late, and tomorrow is a school day. We should go home soon. But I just met Papa, Sophia protested. Can't I stay a little longer? Can't he come home with us? The innocent questions were like arrows finding their mark. James felt each one pierce through his defenses, forcing him to confront the magnitude of what he had missed. Sophia was 5 years old. 5 years of birthdays, of first words and first steps, of bedtime stories and scraped knees and all the thousand small moments that made up a childhood. He had missed all of it, and there was no way to get any of it back. Papa has his own home, Isabella explained carefully. This is where he lives and works. Sophia looked around the magnificent office with its expensive furniture and stunning views. He lives here, in this room. No, Mia, he has a house somewhere else. Is it bigger than our apartment? Isabella glanced at James, unsure how to answer that question without making their daughter feel bad about their modest living situation. Size doesn't matter, James said suddenly. What matters is that it's filled with people you love. It was exactly the right thing to say, and Isabella felt some of her defensive walls begin to lower. Maybe James Morrison wasn't the cold, calculating businessman she had imagined him to be. Maybe there was more depth to him than the newspaper article suggested. Our apartment is small, Sophia said matter-of-factly, but it has pictures of Papa on the walls so it feels like he's with us. James's breath caught. Pictures of me. Mama cut them out of magazines, Sophia explained proudly. She has a whole box full of pictures of the buildings you made. She showed me how you started with empty spaces and turned them into beautiful places where people could live and work. James looked at Isabella with something approaching wonder. You kept track of my work. Isabella flushed, embarrassed to have her secret monitoring exposed. I wanted Sophia to know about her father. I wanted her to be proud of what you accomplished, even if you weren't part of our lives. She told me stories about you, Sophia added helpfully, about how you were an orphan like Annie in the movie, but you grew up to be successful and important. She said you were proof that anyone could make their dreams come true if they worked hard enough. The revelation hit James harder than anything else that had happened that evening. While he had been living his life completely unaware of Sophia's existence, Isabella had been painting him as a hero in their daughter's eyes. She had used his success story to inspire Sophia, had made sure their daughter saw him as something positive rather than as the absent father who had never cared enough to find them. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why would you do that for me?" Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady when she answered. "Because she deserved to have a father she could be proud of, and because despite everything, despite the way it ended, you're a good man, James. You were a good man that night 6 years ago, and I never stopped believing that. This is where everything hangs in the balance. Do you think James will step up or run away? Let me know in the comments what you would do in his situation." The weight of Isabella's faith in him was almost unbearable. James had spent 6 years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that he was better off alone, that relationships only led to complications and disappointments. But sitting in his office with his daughter playing quietly in the chair and the woman who had borne her standing before him with tears in her eyes, he felt those walls beginning to crumble. "Tell me about that night," he said suddenly. "Tell me what happened after I left." Isabella glanced at Sophia, who was still absorbed in making rainbow patterns with the crystal, then moved closer to James so they could speak more quietly. "You left early that morning," she said softly. "You had a meeting with investors, remember? You kissed me goodbye and said you'd call me later that day." James did remember. He remembered the way Isabella had looked in his shirt, her hair tousled from sleep, her face soft and unguarded in the morning light. He remembered wanting to cancel his meeting and spend the day with her, talking and laughing and discovering more about the fascinating woman who had appeared in his life like magic. "But you never called," Isabella continued. "And when I tried to reach you, I couldn't get through. I thought maybe you regretted what happened. I thought maybe it was just a one-night thing for you and I had misunderstood the signals." "It wasn't just a one-night thing," James said quickly. "I meant to call. I wanted to call. But that meeting went badly. And then there was a crisis with one of our construction sites, and by the time I had a free moment, it was late and I thought you might be asleep. So, you waited until the next day. And then there was another crisis, and another meeting, and by the time I tried to find you, you were gone. I asked around, but nobody seemed to know where you had gone or how to reach you." Isabella nodded sadly. "I got scared. The longer I didn't hear from you, the more convinced I became that you didn't want to see me again. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I quit my job and moved across town. I didn't want you to feel trapped or obligated." "So you trapped yourself instead," James said quietly. "I made a choice," Isabella corrected. "I chose to raise Sophia on my own rather than force you into a situation you hadn't asked for. But you took a job here. You came back." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. "I needed the work. Night cleaning paid better than anything else I could find with my experience, and I thought maybe if I worked here, I could keep an eye on you from a distance. Make sure you were okay. Make sure Sophia's father was someone she could be proud of." "You were watching over me," James said with wonder. "In my own way, yes." James thought about all the nights he had worked late in his office, all the times he had found everything perfectly organized in the morning, all the small touches that had made his workspace feel less sterile and more welcoming. Isabella had been there, moving through his space like a guardian angel, taking care of him without his knowledge. "I used to find things," he said slowly. "Small things. My coffee mug would be clean even though I was sure I had left it dirty. Papers would be organized in ways that made more sense than how I had left them. The plants in my office never died, even though I never watered them." "You noticed," Isabella said with surprise. "I noticed, but I thought it was just the cleaning staff being thorough. I never imagined it was personal." "Everything about it was personal," Isabella admitted. "Every night I cleaned your office, I was thinking about you, wondering how your day had gone, hoping you were taking care of yourself." Sophia's voice interrupted their quiet conversation. "Mama, I'm hungry." Isabella immediately shifted back into mother mode, checking her watch and realizing how late it had gotten. "Of course you are, Mia. It's way past dinner time. Can Papa come eat with us?" Sophia asked hopefully. Isabella and James looked at each other, both unsure how to navigate this new reality. The revelation was still so fresh, the emotions so raw, that neither of them knew what the appropriate next step should be. "Papa probably has his own dinner plans," Isabella said carefully. "Actually," James said, surprising himself, "I don't. I usually just order takeout and eat at my desk." Every night, Sophia asked with the concern of a child who understood that eating alone wasn't ideal. "Most nights," James admitted. "That's sad," Sophia said with characteristic directness. "People should eat dinner together. That's what Mama taught me." James looked at Isabella, seeing the woman who had raised their daughter with love and wisdom, who had taught her values and manners and the importance of connection. "She's right," he said quietly. "People should eat dinner together." "James," Isabella started, but he held up a hand. "I know this is complicated. I know we have a lot to figure out. But Sophia is right. Tonight, we should eat dinner together." Isabella studied his face, looking for signs of calculation or manipulation, but all she saw was genuine desire to spend time with his daughter. "Okay," she said finally, "but we go to a regular restaurant, somewhere normal where Sophia can be comfortable." "There's a diner about 10 minutes from here," James suggested. "Nothing fancy, but they have good food and it's family-friendly." Sophia clapped her hands excitedly. A real restaurant dinner with Mama and Papa. As they prepared to leave the office, James found himself looking around the space with new eyes. This room had been his sanctuary for years, the place where he felt most in control and most successful. But now he saw it differently. Now he saw it as the place where Isabella had worked quietly in the darkness, taking care of him without his knowledge. Now he saw it as the place where he had first learned he was a father. The crystal paperweight was still on his desk where Sophia had been playing with it. James picked it up and handed it to her. "You can keep this," he said. "To remember tonight." Sophia's eyes widened. "Really? It's mine to keep?" "Really. But you have to promise to take good care of it." "I promise," Sophia said solemnly, clutching the crystal to her chest. As they waited for the elevator, James found himself studying Sophia's profile, memorizing the curve of her cheek and the way her hair caught the light. She was beautiful and bright, and completely innocent of the complicated circumstances that had brought her into existence. She deserved better than the confusion and chaos that had marked her life so far. The elevator arrived and they stepped inside, the same 3 people who had ridden up together an hour earlier, but everything had changed. James was no longer a man without family. Isabella was no longer carrying her secret alone. Sophia was no longer a child whose father was just a collection of magazine pictures on the wall. The diner James had suggested was exactly what Isabella had hoped for. Comfortable booths, simple food, and a relaxed atmosphere where Sophia could be herself without worrying about disturbing other customers. The hostess seated them in a corner booth, and Sophia immediately began exploring the jukebox selectors and sugar packets while James and Isabella studied their menus. "She's very social," James observed, watching Sophia charm the elderly couple in the next booth. "She gets that from you," Isabella said without thinking, then blushed when she realized what she had implied. "You remember that about me?" "I remember everything about that night," Isabella said quietly. "You talked to everyone at the coffee shop where we stopped for breakfast, the barista, the other customers, even the man reading his newspaper in the corner. You made everyone feel seen." James was quiet for a moment, remembering that morning with startling clarity. He had felt different that day, more open and connected than he had in years. Isabella had brought something out in him that he had forgotten existed. "I felt different with you," he admitted. "More like myself than I had in a long time." "What happened to that version of you?" "Life," James said simply. "Business." The walls went back up and I convinced myself it was safer that way. Sophia returned to the table, sliding into the booth next to James with the easy familiarity of a child who had decided he belonged in her life. "Can I have pancakes for dinner?" she asked. "Pancakes are breakfast food, Mia," Isabella said gently. "But this is a special dinner," Sophia argued. "Special dinners should have special food." James found himself smiling, charmed by Sophia's logic. "I think pancakes for dinner sounds perfect for a special occasion." Isabella shot him a look that clearly said, "Don't undermine my parenting," but she was fighting a smile of her own. "Okay," she relented, "but you have to eat some fruit too." "Deal," Sophia said happily, then turned to James. "What are you going to have, Papa?" The casual use of the title still sent shockwaves through James's system, but he was beginning to get used to the feeling. "I think I'll have pancakes too." "When in Rome, right?" "We're not in Rome," Sophia said seriously. "We're in Austin. It's an expression, sweetheart. It means when you're somewhere special, you should do what the local people do." "Oh," Sophia said, considering this. "So if we were in Rome, we would eat Roman food." "Exactly. What kind of food do they eat in Rome?" And just like that, they were having a normal family conversation. James found himself explaining Italian cuisine to a 5-year-old, while Isabella watched with a mixture of amazement and caution. This was her daughter's first real conversation with her father, and it was happening over pancakes in a diner like it was the most natural thing in the world. When their food arrived, Sophia insisted on sitting between her parents, chattering happily about school and her friends and her favorite TV shows. She asked James dozens of questions about his work, his building, and whether he really lived in the sky like she had imagined. "I live in a building almost as tall as the one where I work," James explained, "but not quite in the sky." "Can I see it sometime?" Sophia asked innocently. The question created an awkward silence. Isabella and James hadn't discussed what would happen next, what kind of relationship he might want with Sophia, or what kind of access Isabella would be comfortable with. "That would be up to your mama," James said carefully. Sophia turned to Isabella with pleading eyes. "Please, Mama, I want to see where Papa lives." Isabella felt trapped between her daughter's innocent desire and her own protective instincts. She didn't know James well enough anymore to trust him completely, but she could see that Sophia was already forming an attachment to him. "We'll see, mija," she said finally. "Papa and I need to talk about a lot of things first." Sophia accepted this answer with the resilience of a child who is used to adult conversations happening around her rather than including her. She went back to her pancakes, occasionally offering bites to both parents and keeping up a steady stream of chatter that filled any awkward silences. Watching Sophia interact with James, Isabella felt a complex mix of emotions. Joy at seeing her daughter finally meet her father, fear that James might disappoint Sophia or decide he didn't want to be involved in her life, sadness for all the moments they had missed, and underneath it all, a trace of the connection she had felt with James 6 years ago, still there despite everything that had happened. James was experiencing his own emotional whirlwind. Every smile from Sophia, every casual touch of her small hand on his arm, every time she called him Papa, was rewiring something fundamental in his brain. He had never imagined wanting children, had convinced himself that he was too selfish and too damaged to be a good father. But sitting in this ordinary diner with his extraordinary daughter, he felt a fierce protective love that surprised him with its intensity. When Sophia excused herself to use the restroom, Isabella and James were left alone for the first time since the initial confrontation in his office. "She's incredible," James said quietly. "She is," Isabella agreed. "And she's also fragile in ways that might not be obvious. She spent 5 years wondering about her father and building up ideas about what having a dad would be like. I need to know that you're serious about this before I let her get too attached." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you can't be a part-time father, James. You can't show up when it's convenient for you and disappear when it gets complicated. Sophia deserves consistency and commitment, not a father who treats her like a hobby." James felt the weight of her words, understanding that this was the most important conversation of his life. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you're ready to be a real father. Not just a wealthy benefactor or a weekend visitor, but someone who shows up for school plays and doctor's appointments and all the mundane parts of parenting that don't make for good photo opportunities." James thought about his life, his schedule, his priorities. Everything would have to change. Business trips would need to be reconsidered. Late nights at the office would have to be balanced against bedtime stories. His carefully ordered existence would be turned upside down by the needs and schedule of a 5-year-old. "I don't know how to be a father," he admitted. "I never had one. I have no idea what I'm doing." "None of us know what we're doing," Isabella said softly. "Parenting isn't something you can learn from a business manual. It's something you figure out as you go, one day at a time. What if I'm terrible at it? Then you learn from your mistakes and try to do better tomorrow. That's what all parents do." Sophia returned from the restroom, climbing back into the booth with renewed energy. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked hopefully. "You just finished dinner," Isabella pointed out. "But it's a special dinner," Sophia reminded her. "Special dinners should have special desserts too." James found himself laughing, delighted by Sophia's negotiating skills. "I think she has a point," he said to Isabella. "You're going to spoil her," Isabella warned, but she was smiling. "Maybe a little," James admitted. "Is that so bad?" Isabella looked at her daughter's bright, happy face and felt her resistance melting. Sophia had never had anyone to spoil her, never had a father figure to dote on her and make her feel special. Maybe a little spoiling wouldn't hurt. "Ice cream it is," she conceded. Sophia cheered and threw her arms around James's neck in an impulsive hug. "Thank you, Papa." The hug lasted only a few seconds, but it changed everything for James. Feeling Sophia's small arms around his neck, her complete trust and affection, he made a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. He was going to be her father, not just in name or biology, but in every way that mattered. He was going to learn how to braid hair and help with homework and chase away monsters under the bed. He was going to show up for every important moment and as many unimportant ones as possible. He was going to be the father Sophia deserved, even if it meant completely rebuilding himself in the process. The ice cream shop was nearly empty at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, but the teenage employee behind the counter seemed happy to serve a family with a very excited little girl. Sophia pressed her face against the glass display case, studying each flavor with the seriousness of a judge evaluating evidence. "What's your favorite flavor, Papa?" she asked, looking up at James expectantly. James realized he couldn't remember the last time he had eaten ice cream. "I honestly don't know," he admitted. "I haven't had ice cream in years." Sophia's eyes widened in horror. "Years. But ice cream is one of the best parts of life." "She's not wrong," Isabella said, amused by her daughter's dramatic reaction. "Sophia, pick 2 flavors so Papa can try both and decide which one he likes better." Sophia took this responsibility very seriously, finally settling on strawberry and chocolate chip cookie dough. James ordered a single scoop of each, while Isabella chose vanilla and Sophia got an elaborate sundae with rainbow sprinkles. They sat at a small table by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness. Sophia chattered between bites of ice cream, telling James about her kindergarten class, her teacher Miss Rodriguez who had the same last name as them, and her best friend Marcus who could already read chapter books. "Do you like to read, Papa?" Sophia asked. "I do," James said, "but I mostly read boring grown-up books about business and economics." "That sounds terrible," Sophia said with 5-year-old bluntness. "Don't you read stories?" "Not really. Mama reads me stories every night before bed. She does all the voices and makes them funny and scary and exciting." James glanced at Isabella, who was blushing slightly. "I'm sure she's very good at it." "She is. Maybe she could read to both of us sometime." The casual suggestion hit James unexpectedly hard. The idea of being included in Sophia's bedtime routine, of being part of the quiet, intimate moments that made up her daily life, was both appealing and terrifying. "We'll see," Isabella said diplomatically, but James caught something in her voice that suggested she wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. As they finished their ice cream, James found himself studying Isabella when she wasn't looking. 6 years had changed her, adding depth and strength to her beauty. Motherhood had refined her features and given her a quiet confidence that was even more attractive than the uncertain young woman he remembered. "I should get Sophia home," Isabella said eventually, checking her phone. "It's way past her bedtime, and she has school tomorrow." "Can Papa come to school with us tomorrow?" Sophia asked hopefully. "Papa has to work, Mia," Isabella explained gently. "But I want to show him my classroom and my pictures on the wall." James felt his heart clench at the disappointment in Sophia's voice. "Maybe I could visit your school sometime soon," he offered. "When your mama thinks it's appropriate." Sophia turned to Isabella with pleading eyes. "Please, Mama. I want all my friends to meet Papa." Isabella hesitated, clearly torn between her daughter's enthusiasm and her own need to protect Sophia from potential disappointment. "Let's see how things go," she said finally. As they prepared to leave the ice cream shop, James realized he didn't want the evening to end. For the first time in years, he felt truly happy rather than just successful. But he also understood that rushing things would be a mistake. Isabella needed time to trust him, and he needed time to figure out how to fit a child into his life. "Can I drive you home?" he offered. "We took the bus," Isabella said. "We don't have a car." James tried to hide his surprise, but Isabella caught his expression. "Not everyone can afford a luxury car, James," she said with a slight edge to her voice. "I know that," James said quickly. "I just meant that it's late and dark and I'd feel better knowing you got home safely." Isabella studied his face for signs of pity or condescension, but all she saw was genuine concern. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you." James's car was exactly what Isabella had expected. Sleek, expensive, and pristine. Sophia was fascinated by the leather seats and the array of buttons and screens on the dashboard. "It's like a spaceship," she breathed, running her small hands over the smooth surfaces. "It's just a car," James said, but he was pleased by her reaction. The drive to Isabella's apartment took them through a part of Austin that James rarely visited. The neighborhoods grew progressively less affluent as they drove, the houses smaller and closer together, the streets less well-maintained. James found himself paying attention to details he had never noticed before, seeing the city through the eyes of someone who lived paycheck to paycheck. Isabella's apartment complex was clean but clearly budget-oriented. The buildings were older, the parking lot cracked in places, and the landscaping minimal but well cared for. James pulled up to the building Isabella indicated, noting the security lights in the playground area where children's toys had been left scattered across the grass. "This is us," Isabella said, gathering her purse and Sophia's backpack. "Can Papa come see our apartment?" Sophia asked as Isabella unbuckled her seatbelt. "Not tonight, Mia. It's very late and Papa needs to get home too." Sophia looked disappointed but didn't argue. She leaned over the center console to hug James goodbye, her small arms barely reaching around his neck. "Thank you for dinner and ice cream, Papa," she said solemnly. "This was the best day of my whole life." The simple words hit James like a physical blow. The best day of her whole life had been a few hours in a diner and an ice cream shop with a father she had just met. What did that say about the rest of her days? What did that say about the life Isabella had been living while he remained oblivious to their existence? "Mine too, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Isabella helped Sophia out of the car, then came around to James's window. "Thank you for tonight," she said quietly. "For the dinner, for being kind to her. She's going to remember this forever." "Isabella," James started, then stopped, unsure what he wanted to say. "I know this is complicated," she said, reading his expression. "I know we have a lot to figure out, but tonight was a good start. What happens now? Now you go home and think about whether you really want to be part of our lives. Not just for tonight when it's new and exciting, but for the long haul when it's messy and inconvenient and ordinary. And if I decide I do want that, then we take it one day at a time and figure it out as we go." James watched Isabella and Sophia walk toward their building, Sophia skipping ahead while Isabella followed more slowly. Just before they reached the door, Sophia turned and waved enthusiastically. James waved back, feeling something fundamental shifting inside his chest. The drive back to his penthouse gave James time to think about everything that had happened. A few hours ago, his biggest concern had been impressing potential investors at the gala. Now he was the father of a 5-year-old girl who thought dinner at a diner was the best day of her life. His penthouse felt different when he walked in, emptier somehow despite being exactly the same as when he had left it. The expensive furniture and carefully chosen art seemed cold and lifeless compared to Sophia's animated chatter and Isabella's warm smile. For the first time, James's perfect apartment felt more like a museum than a home. He poured himself a drink and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the woman and child who were somewhere out there in the darkness. Somewhere in a modest apartment that Sophia called home, Isabella was probably tucking their daughter into bed and answering questions about the evening they had shared. James pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, looking for the name of the private investigator he occasionally used for business purposes. Then he stopped, his thumb hovering over the number. Isabella had been honest with him tonight, more honest than he probably deserved. She had shared her story, her fears, her hopes for Sophia's future. Hiring an investigator to dig into her background would be a betrayal of that trust. Instead, he called his assistant and left a message asking her to clear his calendar for the next morning. He needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to be the father Sophia deserved without completely destroying the life he had built. The next morning brought a harsh reminder that James Morrison's private life was no longer private. His phone was buzzing with calls from reporters, business associates, and board members who had heard about the previous night's events. The story was already spreading through Austin's social circles, growing and changing with each retelling. James's assistant, Margaret, arrived at his office early with a stack of newspapers and a grim expression. "Sir," she said, setting the papers on his desk, "we need to discuss damage control." The headlines were exactly what James had expected. CEO's secret love child revealed at charity gala. Morrison Industries founder confronted by daughter he never knew. Billionaire's hidden family exposed in public scandal. The articles were mostly speculation, filled with unnamed sources and half-truths, but the basic facts were accurate enough to be damaging. James Morrison, one of Austin's most eligible bachelors, had a 5-year-old daughter with a woman who worked as a cleaning lady in his own building. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting," Margaret continued. "The PR department wants to schedule a press conference, and your lawyer called 3 times before 7 a.m. James looked at the newspapers, feeling a cold fury building in his chest. These people were treating his daughter like a scandal, his private life like entertainment. They were turning the most important night of his life into a circus for their amusement. "Cancel the board meeting," he said quietly. "Sir, cancel it. Tell them we'll meet when I'm ready to meet, not when they demand it. And the press conference? No press conference. We're not feeding this story any more than it's already been fed." Margaret looked nervous. "Sir, with respect, ignoring this won't make it go away. The speculation will only get worse if you don't control the narrative." James understood her point, but he also understood something more important. Sophia was a child who deserved to be protected from this media frenzy. Isabella was a private person who had never asked to be thrust into the spotlight. Whatever response he made needed to put their welfare ahead of his business interests. "Get me Isabella Rodriguez's phone number," he told Margaret, "and clear my schedule for the entire day." Margaret looked surprised but nodded. "I'll take care of it right away." While Margaret worked on tracking down Isabella's contact information, James called his lawyer to discuss the legal implications of his newfound fatherhood. The conversation was clinical and strategic, focused on paternity tests and custody arrangements and financial obligations. By the time he hung up, James felt slightly sick. He didn't want to treat Sophia like a legal problem to be solved. He didn't want to reduce Isabella to a series of contractual obligations. But the reality was that his wealth and public profile created complications that couldn't be ignored. Margaret returned with Isabella's phone number and the news that several reporters were camped outside the Morrison Industries building, hoping to get a statement or photograph. James thanked her and dialed Isabella's number, hoping she would answer. "Hello." Isabella's voice was cautious, as if she was expecting bad news. "Isabella, it's James. I wanted to call and warn you that the story about last night has hit the newspapers." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "How bad is it?" she asked finally. "Bad enough. There are reporters at my building, and they'll probably try to find you and Sophia soon if they haven't already." "Oh God," Isabella whispered. "Sophia doesn't understand any of this. She's just excited about meeting her papa. She doesn't know that people might try to turn this into something ugly." "Where are you now?" "At work. Sophia's at school. I called in sick because I couldn't face going to the Morrison building after everything that happened, but I still have to work my morning job at the cafe." James could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the stress of trying to maintain multiple jobs while protecting her daughter from a situation that was spiraling out of control. "Take the day off," he said. "All of your jobs. I'll make sure you don't lose any pay. I don't want your charity, James. It's not charity. It's me taking responsibility for the chaos I've caused in your life. You didn't cause this. Sophia did when she called you Papa in front of all those people. Sophia's 5 years old. She didn't know she was creating a media storm. The adults should have handled this better." Isabella was quiet for a moment, and James could hear voices in the background, the sounds of a busy cafe during the morning rush. "The reporters," she said finally. "What am I supposed to tell them if they find me?" "Tell them nothing. Refer them to my office. Better yet, don't talk to them at all. That's easy for you to say. You have security and lawyers and people whose job it is to protect you from this kind of thing. I have a 5-year-old and 3 jobs in an apartment that doesn't have a doorman." James felt a wave of guilt wash over him. Isabella was right. His wealth insulated him from many of the consequences of public attention, while she was completely exposed. "Let me help," he said. "Let me send security to watch your apartment. Make sure Sophia gets to and from school safely. Let me put you somewhere safe until this dies down. I don't want to hide from my life, James, and I don't want Sophia to think she did something wrong. She didn't do anything wrong. Neither did you. This is my fault for not being more careful last night, for not anticipating how quickly this would get out of control. So, what do we do?" James looked out his office window at the reporters gathered on the sidewalk below, then at the newspapers scattered across his desk with their sensational headlines. "We handle this together," he said. "As a family." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and complication in equal measure. "We're not a family, James," Isabella said quietly. "We're 2 people with a child in common in a very complicated situation." "Then, let's try to become one," James said. "Let's try to figure out how to be what Sophia needs us to be." Isabella was quiet for a long time, and James could almost hear her thinking, weighing her options and her fears against her hopes for Sophia's future. "Okay," she said finally, "but we do this my way. Slowly, carefully, with Sophia's well-being as the top priority." "Agreed. And no reporters, no photographers, no turning Sophia into a media spectacle. I'll make sure of it. And if you decide this is too complicated, if you decide you don't want to be part of our lives after all, you tell me honestly instead of just disappearing." "Isabella," James said seriously, "I'm not going anywhere. Last night changed everything for me. I want to be Sophia's father, and I want to find a way for us to be a family. Whatever that looks like, however long it takes." After hanging up with Isabella, James made a series of phone calls that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew him well. He hired a private security firm to provide discreet protection for Isabella and Sophia. He called the principal of Sophia's school to explain the situation and ensure that no unauthorized persons would be allowed near his daughter. He contacted his PR firm and instructed them to issue a simple statement confirming that he had recently learned he had a daughter and requesting privacy for all involved. Most importantly, he called his assistant and asked her to block out time every day for the next month. When Margaret asked what the appointments were for, James simply said, "Learning to be a father." The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, phone calls, and damage control. James's board members expressed concern about the impact on the company's reputation. His business partners wanted reassurance that his personal life wouldn't affect their deals. His lawyer laid out various scenarios for custody arrangements and financial support. Through it all, James found himself thinking about Sophia's bright smile and Isabella's quiet strength. All of these people were treating his daughter like a problem to be managed, but she wasn't a problem. She was a miracle he had been too blind to see. That evening, James drove to Sophia's school to pick her up, despite Isabella's protests that it wasn't necessary. He wanted to see where his daughter spent her days, wanted to meet the teachers who were helping to shape her young mind. The school was a modest public elementary school in Isabella's neighborhood, clean and well-maintained, but clearly operating on a tight budget. James walked into the main office where the principal was waiting for him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Mr. Morrison," Principal Davis said, extending her hand, "thank you for calling ahead. We've had several reporters asking about Sophia today, but we've followed your instructions and haven't allowed anyone without proper authorization near her." "I appreciate that," James said. "How is she doing?" "Sophia's having a wonderful day," Principal Davis said with a smile. "She's been telling everyone about her papa and how he took her for ice cream last night. She's very excited to see you." James felt his chest tighten with emotion. While he had been dealing with reporters and lawyers and business concerns, Sophia had been at school, proud and happy about meeting her father. She wasn't thinking about media scandals or damaged reputations. She was just a little girl who was excited about having a papa. When Sophia saw James waiting outside her classroom, her face lit up like Christmas morning. She ran to him without hesitation, throwing her arms around his legs in an enthusiastic hug. "Papa, you came to my school," she said, beaming up at him. "I wanted to see where you learn and meet your teacher," James said, kneeling down to her level. Sophia took his hand and pulled him into the classroom, where Mrs. Patterson was waiting with the indulgent smile of a teacher who had seen many excited children introducing family members. "Mrs. Patterson, this is my papa," Sophia announced proudly. "He builds tall buildings and lives in the sky, and last night we had pancakes for dinner." "It's very nice to meet you, Mr. Morrison," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "Sophia is one of my favorite students. She's bright, kind, and always eager to help her classmates." James felt a surge of pride at hearing his daughter praised. "She gets that from her mother," he said. Sophia insisted on showing James every corner of the classroom, from the reading corner where she liked to look at picture books to the art station where she had painted a family portrait that morning. The painting showed 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with Mama, Papa, and me written carefully at the bottom in Sophia's kindergarten handwriting. "Can I take this home with me?" James asked, his voice thick with emotion. "It's for you," Sophia said happily. "I painted it special because now I have a mama and a papa like the other kids." As they prepared to leave the school, Sophia chattered about her day, telling James about the books they had read and the songs they had sung and the games they had played at recess. Her innocent joy was a stark contrast to the complexity of the adult world that was swirling around their situation. Isabella was waiting for them at her apartment, looking tired but relieved to see Sophia bouncing with excitement. She had spent the day fielding phone calls from reporters and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while her world was turned upside down. "How was school, Mija?" Isabella asked, hugging Sophia tightly. "It was the best day ever," Sophia announced. "Papa came to meet Mrs. Patterson and he saw my painting and he said it was beautiful." Isabella looked at James with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," James replied. "I missed the first 5 years of her life. I'm not missing any more days if I can help it." If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for redemption, and let me know in the comments what lesson resonated most with you. Over the following weeks, James began the complicated process of learning to be a father, while Isabella slowly learned to trust him with their daughter's heart. It wasn't easy for either of them. James had to completely restructure his life, turning down business trips and cutting short meetings to make time for school pickup and bedtime stories. Isabella had to overcome years of independence and self-protection to allow someone else to help care for Sophia. But gradually, carefully, they began to build something that resembled a family. James started picking Sophia up from school 3 days a week, taking her for ice cream or to the park or simply back to his office where she would draw pictures while he finished his work. Isabella joined them for dinner twice a week, slowly getting used to seeing James interact with their daughter. The media attention gradually died down as other stories took precedence, but the impact on their lives was permanent. James discovered that being a father was both easier and harder than he had expected. Easier because Sophia's love was unconditional and uncomplicated. Harder because every decision now had to be weighed against its impact on a child who depended on him completely. Isabella found herself in the strange position of watching the man who had once been a one-night stand transform into a devoted father. James threw himself into parenting with the same intensity he brought to business, reading books about child development and consulting experts about everything from nutrition to education. But more importantly, he listened to Sophia, paid attention to what made her happy and what frightened her, and slowly learned to put her needs ahead of his own convenience. The legal aspects of their situation were resolved quietly and amicably. James insisted on formal adoption papers that would give him legal rights and responsibilities as Sophia's father. He set up trust funds for her education and future, but more importantly, he showed up for the daily moments that money couldn't buy. Isabella quit 2 of her 3 jobs when James insisted on providing financial support, but she kept her position at the morning cafe because she enjoyed the work and valued her independence. She used the extra time to enroll in business classes, working toward her dream of opening her own catering company. The most significant change came 6 months after that first dinner at the diner, when James asked Isabella and Sophia to move into a house he had bought in Sophia's school district. It wasn't his penthouse, and it wasn't Isabella's modest apartment. It was something new, something they could build together as a family. It has a yard for Sophia to play in, James explained as they toured the house together, and a big kitchen for when you're ready to start your catering business, and enough bedrooms so Sophia can have friends sleep over. Sophia raced through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing off the hardwood floors as she explored what would become her new home. "Can I paint my room purple?" she called from upstairs. "Any color you want, sweetheart," James called back. Isabella stood in the kitchen, looking out at the backyard, where a swing set was already installed. "You're sure about this?" she asked quietly. "All of it. The house, the commitment, being a family. I've never been more sure of anything in my life," James said. "I love Sophia, and I love you, Isabella. I think I fell in love with you 6 years ago, and I've been trying to find my way back to that feeling ever since." Isabella turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the same vulnerability and honesty that had drawn her to him that first night. "I love you too," she said softly. "I think I always have." When they kissed, it was different from that night 6 years ago. Then, they had been 2 lonely people finding comfort in each other. Now, they were partners, parents, people who had chosen to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their separate lives. Sophia's voice interrupted them from the top of the stairs. "Are you kissing?" she called down, giggling. "Gross. Very gross," James agreed, grinning at Isabella. "Wanted to come see it up close?" "No, thank you," Sophia said primly. "But I'm glad you're kissing, because that means we're really going to be a family now." "We're already a family, mija," Isabella called up to her. "We just needed time to figure out what that looked like." The house became home faster than any of them had expected. Sophia's purple bedroom filled with books and toys and artwork from school. Isabella's kitchen became the testing ground for recipes she was developing for her catering business. James's home office became a place where he could work while still being available for homework help and bedtime stories. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Sophia occasionally had nightmares about her papa disappearing again. Isabella sometimes struggled with feelings of inadequacy when comparing her modest background to James's wealth and education. James battled his own demons from childhood, afraid that he would somehow damage the beautiful family he had been given. But they worked through each challenge together, with patience and communication and the kind of commitment that grows stronger under pressure. They went to family counseling to learn how to navigate their unique situation. They established routines and traditions that made them feel like a real family. They celebrated small victories and supported each other through setbacks. A year after Sophia first called James Papa at the charity gala, they were married in a small ceremony in their backyard, with Sophia as the flower girl and maid of honor rolled into one. The wedding was everything the original gala had not been: intimate, authentic, and focused on love rather than appearances. "Do you, James Morrison, take Isabella Rodriguez to be your wife? And do you promise to be a loving husband and father to the family you've been blessed with?" the minister asked. "I do," James said, his voice strong and clear as he looked at the woman who had given him everything he never knew he wanted. "Do you, Isabella Rodriguez, take James Morrison to be your husband, and do you promise to build a life together based on love, trust, and commitment to your daughter's well-being?" "I do," Isabella said, tears streaming down her face as she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Can I say something?" Sophia interrupted, tugging on the minister's robes. The minister smiled and handed her the microphone. "Of course, Sophia." Sophia looked out at the small gathering of friends and family, then at her parents, who were holding hands and crying happy tears. "I just want to say that this is the best day of my whole life," she announced. "Even better than ice cream for dinner or painting my room purple. Because now I have a mama and a papa who love each other and love me, and we're going to be together forever and ever." The simplicity and truth of her words left hardly a dry eye in the gathering. James picked Sophia up and held her between himself and Isabella as they were pronounced a family, not just in their hearts but in the eyes of the law and their community. The story that had begun with a scandal became a testament to the power of love to heal old wounds and create new possibilities. James Morrison, who had once believed that success was measured only in profit margins and property values, learned that his greatest achievement was the family he had built with Isabella and Sophia. Isabella, who had spent years believing that she had to carry every burden alone, discovered that partnership could make her stronger rather than weaker. She opened her catering business 2 years after their wedding, with James as her business partner and Sophia as her most enthusiastic taste tester. Sophia grew up knowing that she was loved completely by both parents, that her existence was a blessing rather than a mistake, and that families come in many different forms but are always held together by love and commitment. The lessons they learned together rippled out into their community and beyond. James used his position and wealth to advocate for single parents, establishing a foundation that provided childcare, education, and business opportunities for families struggling to make ends meet. Isabella became a mentor for other immigrant women starting their own businesses, sharing the lessons she had learned about courage and perseverance. Their story became proof that it's never too late to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, responsibility over convenience. It showed that the most important successes in life aren't measured in dollars or headlines, but in the relationships we build and the love we share. Sometimes the most beautiful families are born from the most broken circumstances. Sometimes the word papa spoken by an innocent child can heal wounds that have festered for years. And sometimes the love we're most afraid to claim is exactly the love that will save us. Years later, when Sophia was old enough to understand the full story of how her family came to be, she would look at the newspaper clippings from that night, at the charity gala, and marvel at how something that seemed so catastrophic at the time had actually been the beginning of the best part of all their lives. "You know what I think," she would tell her parents as they sat together in their backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "What do you think, sweetheart?" James would ask, marveling as he always did at the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to his daughter. "I think God knew we needed each other, so he gave me the courage to walk up to you that night and call you Papa. Because sometimes adults are too scared to ask for what they really want, so kids have to do it for them." Isabella and James would exchange glances over Sophia's head, both thinking the same thing. Their daughter was probably right. Sometimes it takes the fearless honesty of a child to break down the walls that adults spend years building. Sometimes the most profound truths come from the simplest sources. The word papa had changed everything for all of them. It had shattered James's carefully controlled world and forced him to confront what really mattered. It had ended Isabella's years of carrying her secret alone, and given her permission to hope for more than she had ever thought possible. It had given Sophia the family she had always dreamed of and deserved. In the end, the scandal that had threatened to destroy James Morrison's reputation had actually saved his soul. The moment that had seemed like his worst nightmare had turned out to be his greatest blessing. The child he had never known existed had taught him that love was the only success that truly mattered. And in their house filled with laughter and arguments and homework help and bedtime stories, in their life built on forgiveness and second chances and the courage to keep trying, they had found something more valuable than any business empire or social status or carefully maintained image. They had found each other. They had found home. They had found the kind of love that transforms ordinary moments into miracles and proves that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simplest words. "Papa," Sophia had said that night, and everything had changed forever. The best stories don't always have fairy tale beginnings, but they can have fairy tale endings if we're brave enough to choose love over fear, truth over convenience, and connection over control. James and Isabella and Sophia Morrison learned that lesson together, one day at a time, building a family that was stronger because of the challenges they had overcome together. Their story reminds us that it's never too late to become the person we're meant to be, to claim the love we deserve, or to build the family our hearts have always known was possible. Sometimes we just need a 5-year-old with fearless honesty to show us the way.